You get me, got you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, got you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, got you.
Hello, how you doing? Welcome to Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. I'm your host, Corey Nathan. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy, how we can work together to fix it. You've heard recently in recent weeks from some of my colleagues from the Democracy Group. Love those folks, and it was great to be with everybody in DC last month. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow, rate, review us on all your podcast apps, and check out our Substack. We have links in the show notes to make all of this stuff easy to find. It really does help so we can continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with friend of the pod, Mike Madrid. Mike
Corey,
is, how
yeah.
you doing, Mike? Nice to see you.
It's so great to be with you, buddy. I'm gonna let you get back to that intro, but I'm just excited to be with you. So I wanted to jump in and say, hey.
Yeah, hey, and it's cool because every time I get to rewrite the intro, some folks know you from prior appearances, but
Yeah.
for those who don't, well, this is your lucky day. You get to know Mike Madrid. Mike is a
I,
renowned American political consultant, one of the country's authoritative experts on Latino voters. He is a co-founder of the Lincoln Project, and also the author of an incredibly consequential book that came out a little over a year ago, The Latino Century: How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy, now available in paperback. He is the co-host of the Latino Vote podcast, along with Chuck Rocha, who's actually still winning campaigns, such as Senator Ruben Gallego's successful run in Arizona last year. And I got to give a plug for the Great Transformation, Mike Substack. That is one of the most informed, no bullshit resources for folks who just want to know what's really going on in American politics, as well as we were just talking about this before we hit record. Occasionally, some really poignant, beautifully written stories of Mike's travels around the country and around the world. So, like I said, Mike, it's really good to be with you, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Corey. I love this show because I think we first started talking when I was with the Lincoln Project.
Yeah.
And so this is always like a good benchmark for me. Like I haven't done Corey's show in a while. You've become a dear friend, a great friend. We text, we talk. When I've got questions of you, you're always there. You'll sometimes ask. You've just been such a big supporter, a good friend, and great brain. And this show has just done remarkable things. So I'm always honored whenever you ask. I'm like, yeah, clear the calendar. Let me get on Corey's show. Let's go talk again. I love talking to this guy.
That's so cool, man. I'm hoping that the gig won't be up anytime soon. Like, I don't know if you experience this, but I'm like, whenever somebody cool comes on, it's still with you. And, recently we had EJ Dion come on the first time.
You got
And
amazing guests lately. I'm like, man, he's bigger than me. He's outgrown Mike Madrid.
stop. But I'm waiting for the gig to be up to be like, that Corey's so full of shit. But okay, so like I said, it's so cool. The Substack is really great because we have been hanging out for a few years and coming on the show and seeing you up in Sacramento and just all kinds of fun fun adventures. But that story that you wrote about your pilgrimage to Madrid, New Mexico, I think I'm saying that right.
Madrid.
Madrid. I just want to give one quote, and then I want you to take it from here.
Yeah.
Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves matter more. Oh man, I didn't think I'd get emotional. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves matter more than the facts we can verify. And sometimes chasing ghosts gives them the signal to lead us to exactly what they know we need to, where they know we need to go. Sorry
Yeah.
to get emotional on you, man, but it really
Uh,
touched a nerve for me.
it was, I appreciate that. And there was just, the response was really strong and people connected that way. I wrote the Great Transformation is about kind of what's happening in this world with technological change and political change and economic change. And I had this real kind of fascinating personal experience in a very short window of time that was really, in its own way, I guess, transformative. And I decided to write this personal piece about my father and baseball, which was his passion. It was our common bond. Like a lot of men, we were not, we loved each other dearly, but just didn't have the words to understand each other. And baseball became that bridge. That's how
Mm.
we met and talked in the middle when we needed each other. And while we weren't able to usually get into stuff that we needed to talk about, just being with each other was important enough. And this story really started on this Father's Day is when it happened, just a few weeks ago. I woke up, was kind of thinking about my own children, where my life was at this point. I'm 54 now. I just turned 54 right before Father's Day.
I'll be
That was the
54 on the 26th of this month.
okay.
Yeah.
So
So,
my grandfather, Manuel, who was born in New Mexico, Silver City, New Mexico, died when he was
oh,
54.
wow.
So my father lost his father when he was 15 years old. And the book, I was going to Albuquerque for a book signing for my book that came out, the Latino Century book that you mentioned. And I wanted to take part of a day to just kind of go drive around a part of New Mexico where there were a lot of Madrids, just to kind of, see my dad, feel my dad. He's been gone for about 11 years now. And what I realized in this process was there's just a lot of unresolved grief there. There's just, just a lot that was still there after 11 years. And so as I was researching cities, I found this little ghost town named Madrid, New Mexico, in the middle of Santa Fe and Albuquerque, out in kind of the New Mexican desert. Population now is about 100, 150 people, but it's largely a ghost town. And I started to do research on this and found that this city has this really phenomenal, fascinating history from the 1930s. It was actually bigger than Albuquerque in its day. It was a coal mining town, and the name probably came from the Madrids in the area who had coal mining claims, named the city after the family name. So clearly there was, I've got relatives that came through Madrid, founded the city. Long way of saying there was this legendary fabled game, but that supposedly happened between the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1934 and the Madrid Miners, a double-A team of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And it gave me this sort of need to go on this pilgrimage to find and rediscover my dad.
Yeah.
Because, this was my family's name. It's our city where our people came from. The Brooklyn Dodgers played this game, possibly an exhibition game in the 1930s. And so I went out there and found that this stadium still exists, that this game was purportedly played in. And there was all these signs that my father was, kind of calling me and driving me to go to this place to kind of do one last baseball game together. And so the essay is that journey, but the ultimate conclusion, Corey, without ruining it for people that want to read it, is that story really is what matters. As our loved ones do start to fade and the memories become less crisp and clear, those feelings and the memories that we have told ourselves about those feelings is really who they are in us and will stay with us forever. And that's their legacy. And I make some comparisons to this ghost town that has this storied past, not all of which is true, but it doesn't really matter because it's that story that allows it to move forward. It allows it to be a city. And as long as it holds on to the myth and the history and the story of the past, it will always have a future. And that's kind of, I think, symbolic of us as human beings and the way we carry those that have passed before us. And so, got to cry with my dad again and think about baseball. And now I'm getting teared up. Sorry. And be with him again, in a way that I have not been able to for over a decade. And so I'm glad that it touched you. I know you shared some stuff about the Mets and
Yeah.
your family in New York. And that is part of it, is just familial relationships and the way we grieve those that have passed. And it's also baseball, the romance of baseball and how it's bigger than a game.
It is baseball. It's a way to mark time and spend time with those you love. And some of my story. There were times when I couldn't talk to my dad about anything really. But as Bob Costas would say, when I couldn't talk about anything else with my father, I could still talk about baseball. There was
That's
still this thing that brought us together and memories.
that's
So
exactly my experience. And I think it's very common, maybe more acute with men because sometimes we lack those skills to be able to communicate both as father and as son. But there was about 12, 15 years where my dad and I didn't have literally anything to talk about, but we still had baseball.
yeah, yeah. But then also going to Madrid, New Mexico, what was fascinating was to begin to color in the story of your grandfather and his generation.
Yeah.
So even if you couldn't necessarily, if there wasn't a diary that he wrote, for example, you could start to fill in the blanks. The way that I'm doing now, say there was part of my family that came from what's now Ukraine. It was part of the Russian Empire at the time. But I can fill, because of what I know from history, I can fill in the blanks of what Chaim Ruben's life was like. My father's grandfather, who he was named after. Um, I can fill in the blanks of who those people were, and then draw those stories forward about how that shaped me and us, right?
Exactly. And let me, yeah. So Manuel Madrid, my grandfather, came wester. He was in New Mexico, but during the Depression, he left as a young man. He lost his own father at 17,
Wow.
incidentally. And so he came west, and to kind of, have a better life in the Los Angeles basin, the same way the Dodgers did. I draw that correlation. He took my father, as a father and son relationship to um, the Los Angeles Coliseum, which was where the Dodgers played their first games before Dodger Stadium was completed.
Yeah.
So they saw the Dodgers their first year out west. And but I did learn a lot about New Mexico and why he had to leave and what was driving this city of Madrid. Madrid, New Mexico, by the way, it was a coal town. And so it was literally a company town. The town of Albuquerque and Cerrillos coal mines owned all of the houses in town. So if you came as an employee, you worked in the mines beneath the earth, you came up at the end of the day, you paid rents to a company town, you bought your food at a company-owned general store, and you got free electricity because they were so abundant with coal that they just gave everybody electricity, including the stadium. So at the height of the Great Depression, this stadium had night baseball because there was coal. And it was this peculiar little city that was very prosperous during the Depression because they were mining coal, and they had a minor league team that played night games for the miners that would come out, in the evening and could still get some entertainment in their kind of meager, miserable lives and watch baseball. And this prosperous town ultimately collapses in the 1950s when coal crashes and natural gas replaces it. And so, yeah, there's this boom bust dynamic that is a part of life. It was a part of the Madrid family story. It's where we began. And to think that my grandfather would have been, or his cousins or uncles or some Madrid somewhere would be in the stadiums in Madrid, New Mexico, out in the middle of nowhere while it was prosperous. And now it's this ghost town, but in the same stadium with the same stands, was just too coincidental of a story to not be out there while I would happen to be in New Mexico.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons that this particular story struck such a chord with me at this particular time is because we're looking around us and we're seeing actions being taken on a large scale that can only be executed by folks who separate themselves from the humanity of the people that they're imposing those actions upon. And they're separating themselves from the little communities of people like Madrid, New Mexico, and like your grandfather's story. We're humanizing it, right? But I wonder if that occurs to, say, the ICE officers that are going to Home Depot or to, nursery school graduations, or, I wonder if that occurs to them or if they're just doing the job. I hope I'm not making too strained of a connection here.
No, no. I mean, look, let's also keep in mind, and I'm not going to make a moral judgment on all of this, but there is some, I think, that is rightfully imparted at this moment. A huge number of ICE officials and a huge number of Border Patrol are Latinos, they're Hispanics, many of them not far removed from the immigrant experience themselves. A lot of these are the only people that live in these communities to do those jobs, especially along the border. And so there's a connection there. And there has to be some sort of emotional bifurcation with what you're doing when you grab an old man or an old woman and throw them into a van, knowing that maybe you did met your quota for the day, but at what cost? Like, what are you doing to your own humanity and to your own soul? And I understand the justification of saying, well, they're not here, they're not supposed to be here, and that's fine. But we have done this as a nation before. Barack Obama deported far more people than Donald Trump ever did without the inhumanity. And so we have to understand something. I'm in Florida at the moment as we're recording this, where Donald Trump is in the Everglades announcing the opening of Alligator Alcatraz. where, in the middle of the Everglades swamp, they built a prison so that those that could escape would be eaten by alligators as another line of protection. This is cruelty by design. This does not need to be done this way. This can all be done humanely. But one of the reasons that they're doing this is to demonstrate the cruelty and inhumanity to prevent more people from coming. And think about what that does to your own soul, but think of more importantly what it does to us and the soul of our nation when we are a people that will forever bear that weight, and rightfully so, that we will forever be the people that fronts the scars of this moment. This is our American story now. This is who we are. I'm not saying all of us individually, but collectively. America is doing this right now, today.
Yeah.
And if we're not speaking out, then we are individually complicit in it. And so, yeah, Corey, to speak to our spirit and to our soul is very important at this time, because these are the moments in a nation's history when our character is defined. And this may be one of our darkest moments as a people.
Yeah. And I certainly don't want to communicate a blanket judgment that I'm making on individuals who work for ICE and are following orders. By the way, I read speaking of Substack, I read a really timely, in-depth piece by a fellow named Roger Herbert. He was a naval officer for many years, a Navy SEAL, and actually taught ethics at the Naval Academy in Annapolis for several years. And he wrote on this, in particular, reflections on Marines in LA and the ethical considerations of officers who are in charge, and then going up the scale, as well as individuals who are carrying out these orders, different considerations. So again, his name is Roger Herbert. It's on Substack, and the title of the piece is "Reflections on Marines in LA" that I would commend to everyone. I did want to ask, it has been a while since we talked, how this is obviously a very prominent issue that we're talking about, but it's not the only thing that's going on. How have you been processing Trump 2.0 so far?
Well, I'm trying to, maybe for my own mental health, but sort of kind of separate myself from a lot of the my deeply held passions and convictions on where we are as a country, so that I can clinically observe and tell the stories and report on what I think people should be asking themselves during this time. And let me explain why. And it's why I write at The Great Transformation. It's why I write the stories and cover the things that I do. This country is changing. The world is changing. And I believe, and I remain very optimistic, Corey. You and I have these conversations, and it's like sometimes people will talk to me for an hour. I'll do a podcast interview, and people will say, "Well, gosh, this is all very bleak. Like, how long do you think humanity has?" And I'll end by saying, "I've never been more optimistic about where we're at." And people are like, "Well, how can you hold those two things in common?" And the answer for me is very simple. The answer is simple. The process is extremely tortured, and that is this: these are the moments when character is defined. And like I said, only through struggle can virtue emerge.
Mm,
Only through suffering can we value what we have. And in many ways, I believe that the reason why things are so dark and so ugly at this moment is because for the past 30 years, we've lived a life of relative luxury and peace and Pax Americana, where the US was this global hegemon and we believed it was the end of history. That is not. The human story is one of struggle. It's one of strife. It's one of pain and suffering. It's one of what we do to each other. And we're doing all of that right now. And so it feels extremely awful and ugly, and it is, but we need to put it into context. We are a country that was made up of slavers. We owned other people not that long ago, by the way.
yeah.
We are a country that, we're Jim Crow. We are the country that turned around Jewish refugees fleeing from Europe during the Holocaust on a ship that sent them to their deaths. Like we have done this. We even turned the Japanese citizens. We took their properties, their rights, and put them into internment camps. That is the American story. And it doesn't make us a bad people. It makes us a conflicted people. And those bad things happen only when not enough good voices rise up and demand that we do better. And we have always, despite all of those ugly marks in our history, we have emerged as a bigger, better people. But we will always be challenged. And I'm going to say something very peculiar, very, very, very strange. But we are blessed to be challenged because it makes us worthy of the moment. And we have to be worthy of this moment. We have to find our true individual and American character to emerge as a more virtuous, better people. And I'm completely confident that we will. I don't think it will be easy. I think it will be a struggle. I think it will be a mighty struggle. I think it will forever alter our character, but we will emerge a better people forward. Of that, I'm convinced.
You reminded me of a story of a two farmers who lived about a mile from each other, and this is follow me here. This is I'm going someplace with it. And one farmer had a dog, and the dog was just howling and howling and howling. Just and the farmer from a mile away, his neighbor, he just it got so bad, it just the dog wouldn't stop, and even from a mile away, it was just really bothering him. So he decided to make the trek, walk over to his neighbor's house, and knock on the door, and the dog's right there, howling, 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 and knocks on the door, and he says, "Neighbor, I love you, man, but you know your dog, he is just howling, he won't stop." And his neighbor says, "Well, yeah, he's sitting on a nail about that long." And farmer came over. He said, "Well, why didn't he just get up and move?" And his neighbor said, "Well, I guess it just doesn't hurt quite enough." so, so
Yeah.
I feel like we got
Yeah.
ourselves into a situation where it didn't quite
Yeah.
hurt enough, you know.
Yeah.
But I do wonder though, can we get up? You know, are the better voices, or are we just going to keep on sitting on that damn nail? Are the bigger, better people? Can we be the bigger, better people, or just going to keep on sitting on it and howling away?
Well, that's what we're finding out right now. And I do believe that there's a good 40% of the American people who like who we are, and what we're doing. And
Yeah,
in fact, would vote for it again and again and again and again. And that says something about their character. The question, there's another 40% that, would never put, up with it under any circumstances, but there's that determinative middle. And like I said, one of the good things about this, if you listen to the Ruth Ben, Gyats, if you listen to the Gary Kasparovs, the students of authoritarianism and fascism, what they will say is, one of the redeeming characteristics is Donald Trump is historically unpopular. People don't like this. When you see the rise of a successful fascistic authoritarian regime, usually you're seeing his support levels right now at like 65, 70%. Like this is who the people are, this is what they want. A majority of Americans don't like what they're seeing.
right.
They don't want this, but he's in power, he's doing what he's doing, he's going to exert those levers. They did vote for him. A majority of the voters did vote for him, and that is concerning. But we've got to always be mindful. In the words of Joe Biden, you don't have to convince everybody. You just have to convince enough people.
Right.
And enough people, I think, are seeing this and saying this is not who we are, at least for this moment. But we will never be able to shake the fact in our history that we knew who he was. We convicted him of sexual impropriety. He's committed fraud. He's a felon, 34-time felon. And we sent him in back with even bigger numbers.
Yeah. Well,
So that does say something about who we are.
I think you've pointed this out, and David French, about a week or two ago, made the distinction that he was voted back in because of the what, but now that we're seeing the how, it's widely unpopular. So, do you know the distinction I'm referring to? Because
Yeah, I do, but I also and I think David French is a really brilliant thinker. I disagree with him on a lot, though, curiously, because I would think I would agree with him more, but I find that I don't. And the main reason I don't is because I think he tends to give people the benefit of the doubt too often, and maybe that
oh,
comes from his Christian perspective. I don't. When there's so much evidence and data showing these correlations, at a certain point you have to recognize that there is evil among us.
mm,
And it's something that has always been among us as human beings. It is part of our nature. Not that we are evil, but that there is evil, there's dark shadows. History is too replete with those examples to deny that. And to give that deference or to try to excuse it, I'm not suggesting that he's doing that too much. I think he does it in other parts of his thinking. I don't ascribe to that. I think that we have an obligation, especially as people of goodwill, to stand up and call it what it is and offer no deference to it.
Yeah. Well, I do want to get into the numbers a little bit here, but first, I want to put a name instead of speaking generally about it. I think you were talking with Chuck recently, or maybe it was with Ron, about the story of, and forgive me if I don't have the pronunciation correct, Syed Nasser. Syed Nasser. Do you remember who I'm talking about? It's that heartbreaking story about the. I'll pull it. You know what? I'll pull it
Oh,
up.
was that Ron? Was that Ron?
I think it was, yeah, I think you were talking with Ron about the Afghan man who was detained by ICE
Oh,
after
yes.
helping the US troops. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So he
I
was
don't know
he,
the pronunciation, but yes.
yeah,
Yeah, there's a
so
lot of video that went around with this Afghani. He was basically a spy on behalf of the United States government, putting his life at risk to get intelligence to protect our troops from attacks,
yeah.
and was given asylum, came to the United States, and we've deported him.
Right. Right. And that trial is still happening, not just the way that he was detained, but he's someone. So first of all, he should be uplifted as an American hero, as someone who is definitely an ally at great risk to himself and his family, in a time of war for the US. And he was here legally. He was detained brutally. And they were trying. The attempt was to deport him without due process. So not only was he here as a hero of in America's causes, but he was here legally. He was detained brutally, and the due process that's afforded even to non-citizens, as we understand through the Fifth and the 14th Amendment, was not afforded him. This person, so it was just putting a face on putting the humanity into some of these stories. I thought it was a poignant example. But
And let's look at it is a very poignant example when we can see that one person, but let's also remember, and again, our country has a long history of this. We did this to the Kurds. We did this to the South Vietnamese during the Vietnam War. Now, I'm not saying that they were all here and we deported them, but we abandoned them.
yeah, or
We
more
abandoned
recently in
people
Syria in
in Syria.
2019, I think it was.
We have soldiers now that have carry bullets in their bodies that served as undocumented and fought in the Gulf War that are now self-deporting to South Korea and to other countries because this country, a country that they are carrying shrapnel in their bodies for, because of their service in our armed forces to protect us and fight for freedom on our behalf, are now facing deportation because they're not citizens. How,
Yeah,
by the way, how it is possible for any country to allow somebody to fight in war on our behalf and not automatically guarantee them United States citizenship if they are honorably discharged and served with distinction is beyond me. That's a moral outrage in and of itself. I mean, there's more beyond that, but that if that's not the line, what is?
right.
That's happening today, right now in this country.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's understandable. I think it's just important to put names and faces as opposed to
Yes.
speaking generally about some of these
Humanize it.
things.
Yeah.
But sometimes we put the wrong name and face on it and then start to think generally. So, for example, when unrest, I think that's the word that you used. I think that is a fair way to put it. When unrest was happening, the name and or the face it was of a guy waving a Mexican flag over a burning Waymo, and then all of a sudden that became the proxy, a fictional proxy, but a proxy nonetheless for everything that was happening here in LA. Now you were, I know you've been traveling around a bit, but were you here during the that the particular weekend when things were
I
most
was not in
charged?
Los Angeles. I was in California, but I was not in
Okay.
Los Angeles. Yeah.
Okay. I'd love for you to provide some context of what the protests were about. And I don't want to hold punches back for looters and folks who are engaging
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
but I'd love to hear your context and what caused it, what the
Right.
protests were about, how LAPD was handling it. Let's talk about that a little bit. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. The real flashpoint happened in a city called the name Paramount down in Los Angeles County. Overwhelmingly Latino city, about 80% Latino. There were ICE guards kind of lined up purportedly outside or next to a Home Depot. My understanding of talking to some city officials there, what really happened was they were there was actually an ICE facility that has been there for many, many, many years, like a decade. Um, that was moving some of their trucks out to go onto patrol, and so they were pulling in through the parking lot. They were not actually raiding, but somebody in the community took videotapes saying that there's an ICE raid going on at Home Depot, and it started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. People from the community kind of started to rally, and it became this larger flashpoint in this fight about ICE cracking down and raiding the community, and the community then stepping up. What unfolds over the next 72 hours is you do see both peaceful and not peaceful protest, but they are very distinct, and I do want to explain this. And the LA Times has done a lot of writing, good journalism on this as well. There was no real unrest except for that first day.
Right.
During the day, there was a lot of peaceful protests. There were children, there were families, there were people out there, waving Mexican flags, largely other flags. But at night is when you started to see kind of the professional hooligans, the agitators looking for
Right.
some of the drama that became the justification to bring in the National Guard and to federalize the National Guard and ultimately to bring in the United States Marine Corps. But the containment, the size of where this was actually happening was largely in about a 4-block area in downtown Los Angeles. There was an instance where the 405, I think it was shut down.
It was the 101. Yeah.
101. Actually, there's no justification for any of that. I'm not going to try to make justifications for that. I'm not going to try to rationalize away burning Waymos or attacking police officers or throwing tear gas canisters back or whatever.
Or even
None of that is
graffiti.
appropriate.
Yeah.
Graffiti. None of that is acceptable. But it's also very important to put it into context. If you look at the media, it looked like it was the entire city was on edge. And as I was explaining to a lot of national reporters, and I say this very crassly, but I think your audience is sophisticated to understand this and take this with a grain of salt. Los Angeles knows how to riot.
Yeah.
And I say that because the 1965 riots were enormous. The 1992 riots were enormous. Okay. They were literally the second largest metropolitan area in the United States on edge. This was not even a fraction. It was a fraction of that, a very small fraction. As I said to somebody, it wasn't even the size of an NBA Lakers championship.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
It just wasn't.
Yeah.
So the justification and the ratcheting up of the tension was a conscious effort on behalf of the federal government. They were looking to escalate. There's no other way to explain it, and it's pretty obvious when you understand who's making the call. And of course, right-wing media is going to kind of make this all about, everything except for what it was. And so, when you're competing with two different understandings and realities, and you have our politicians leaning into the exacerbation of tensions and escalating the fight, inevitably it's going to devolve into a situation where it has. But there are still 4,000 federalized national troops in Los Angeles, and there's nothing going on.
There's nothing going on. Yeah. This was an example where I am really curious to see. I think we know how it's going to play out, but I mentioned to you when we were writing to each other before recording today about what I'm thinking of as the vertical balance of power. And I don't think that this particular case, the Gavin Newsom, as the chief executive of California, is going to win, but I am sure as hell glad he's fighting it. I'm also curious. Do you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the vertical balance of power and wanting to see folks push back against the vertical balance of power?
Explain. Why don't you explain more about that for me and for the audience?
Yeah. So we a lot of folks understand what the balance of power is, and I think of there's horizontal and there's vertical. So horizontal is the legislative, executive, judicial branch. Right now we have a legislative branch at the national level that's basically a supplicant because there's the Republican majority in the House, Republican majority in the Senate, and they're basically servants of the executive branch. They become subservient to Donald Trump as the chief executive. It's not ideal, but these folks were elected. It's the results of the last election. So these are the consequences. And as a legislative branch, the current Speaker of the House and the majority are basically making their decision to be subservient to the executive. So that's one way. But there have been other examples that the Trump administration uh, has threatened the Constitution's intent of the balance of power by threatening to ignore judicial rulings, and in some cases actually circumventing rulings that have come down from federal judges. Um, but that's the horizontal balance of power. What I'm curious to see is the vertical balance of power. There's not just a horizontal balance of power, there's a vertical balance of power that goes from federal to state to local. So when I see a Gavin Newsom in this instance pushing back and saying, "Hey, I didn't ask for these troops," so the LAPD was, we trust the LAPD to do a good job, so we're going to push back against Trump, in this case, Trump circumventing Gavin Newsom and local authorities. And we're going to push back against that. I'm curious if there are other ways where chief executives or local elected officials can push back vertically upwards, and reassert the vertical balance of power. So does that make sense? What I'm asking?
Yeah, makes complete sense. Um, the ultimate power in a democracy um, emanates from the people,
From the people,
which would be at the lowest end of that vertical,
right?
technically. And what we're witnessing Gavin Newsom do, and I would argue Alex Padilla and some others in terms of this pushback against the federal government, is an attempt to do that with very few weapons, very few tools, very few resources at their disposal. The power, even in this, you know, checked and balanced system, emanates from the executive office. One, because he's got the bully pulpit, but two, because he is the one person that is elected popularly or through an electoral college system that gives him, quote unquote, the justification to take the actions that he does. The only thing we really have remaining, if the judiciary breaks down at this point, because the legislative branch has ceded its power, ceded its authority to the executive in this instance, is people taking to the streets and using protest as their right. That's why I believe we're witnessing these crackdowns. That's the rationale for the federal overreach, is to shut down that last bit of resistance. I don't think there's any other way to look at it. When there is no rational, logical basis, when local law enforcement is saying, we don't need you here, when the governor is saying, we don't need you here, we've got it, everything is fine. And not only does he send in and federalize 2,000 National Guards troops, he nationalizes 2,000 more and sends in 700 Marines. That is a show of force, not just to Gavin Newsom, not just to Mayor Kevin Bass, not just to local law enforcement. It is a show of force to anybody who opposes the regime. That's why you do this. And that's why I think public opinion has soured so much, because people are saying, this is not what we do in this country, or at
Right.
least we have not up until this moment. And that vertical power structure gives a governor and a mayor, the only recourse they have is to rally the true base of support, which is popular will, and focus it upwards on that vertical towards the executive. That's really the last remaining resource that we have at the moment to keep everything in a check and a balance, with a Supreme Court that's kind of wobbly, breaking his way 60% of the time, 40% not.
I've been the Supreme Court is so interesting to me. I mean, there are a couple of the justices that I pretty much know how they're going to come down on every case. But the ones that he appointed in his first term, if you've ever read their opinions, such interesting. And then so there's the Chief Justice Roberts is also super interesting to me. But I don't want to geek out on that too much. But what I did want to say is June 14th was in some ways really in a lot of ways really encouraging to me. So interestingly, later that afternoon, that was the day of the No Kings rallies all around the country.
Yeah.
And here in this town, there's what's called Good Trouble Corner, which is one of the biggest intersections in all of Santa Clarita. And in the past, I've seen small gatherings there, a few dozen people, every once in a while, a couple hundred max. Well, when I got there at, I think it was 10 o'clock that morning, there were easily 2,000,
Wow.
people.
Yeah.
It went all the way down Valencia Boulevard one way, all the way down McBean the other way. And it was just really, and it was a pretty diverse crowd too. I mean, I was only partially trolling one of my friends saying conservatives like me was there, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but I saw veterans, old, young, all different ethnic backgrounds. And one of the encouraging things later that afternoon, I happened to be at a small fundraiser, a small gathering, about 25 people. And three of our five city council members were there. And technically, they're
I'll
non-affiliated. They
partisan.
don't have a party affiliation, but they're all
Right.
Republicans. They're all
Yeah.
Fox News watching, hardcore Trump supporting Republicans. And all three of them said the same thing. They were like, "Well, I didn't go because not my not my thing, and but I'm sure glad it happened." They all had just a great response. I'm sure glad it happened. And I'm especially glad it was, peaceful and so many people came out to exercise their First Amendment rights. All three of them,
I'm,
same message.
I'm glad somebody else had the courage to do something that I didn't have the courage to do. I mean, look, I appreciate and look, and I've always loved the way you're willing to give some of these folks the benefit of the doubts too, because you do look for those bright rays of somebody doing the right thing ish.
Yeah.
As a Republican, as somebody from those parts, like don't have any tolerance for it. It's like if you were glad, you know what the moment means. You know that this person is doing something awful, and you know that you're standing behind it because now is a time for choosing, as my hero Ronald Reagan said. Now is a time for choosing. There is no sitting on the sidelines and watching this from Fox News and listening to your right wing podcasts or media. Now is a time where character is defined. And for them to say, well, I'm glad they did it, reminds me of the phone calls that I would get with the Lincoln Project from Republican staffers and politicians saying, I'm so proud of you. Someone's got to say this. This is so awesome. And it's like, where are you? Where
Mm.
are you at this moment? Join me. No, 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 I've got kids. No, 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 I've got a mortgage. No, no, I've got a business. No, no, I got reelection. It's like, I have all those things. We all have all those things. That's why it's important to step up. And let me say one more thing, because I have been very critical of your local state senator, Suzette
Yeah.
Valadrez. She has done a remarkable, remarkable job of showing leadership during this time. So I'm going to give her credit where it's due. She has stood up and said, there's a sane and humane way to do this. I'm
She
not saying she opposes sanctuary cities. That's legitimate as a policy decision. She supports the Trump administration's crackdown on criminals. That's absolutely legitimate. She's also saying, how about we focus there, put our priorities there, and slow our roll on the hardworking families that you yourself have acknowledged, and those that have been here for a very long time that are otherwise extraordinarily peaceable, productive members of our society and our communities and our churches and our social structures. And look, that's not as much as I would be saying or am saying as a Republican, but it is something. And to put your name on paper in this moment, frankly, as a Republican, is a hell of a lot more courageous than those city council members that are saying behind the scenes, "Oh, well, I'm glad that it happened, but I'm gonna sit at home and hide here because I don't have the courage to do what clearly needs to be done."
Well, a couple things about Suzette. One is at her announcement get together of just a small gathering of potential supporters for this state Senate run. One of the first things she said is Donald Trump is not the future of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
So that's one. And I looked around the room and I knew at least, 90, if not 95% of the people around that table voted for Trump in 16 and 2024 hadn't happened yet, obviously. So that's one thing. But two is she exemplifies some of the points that you're trying to make about Latino voters. And
Yeah.
so, for example, I think it might have been today that the latest gas tax in California just got implemented. So when Suzette what she is the most vocal about is when she gets up on the Senate floor in Sacramento and says, what are we doing here, guys? The cost
Yeah.
of living is killing us right now. And we're passing, I forget what it is, I think a 65 cent a gallon gas tax. Are you kidding me? You don't have to be Republican. You don't have to be Democrat. You can be independent. You can anywhere in between. This does not make sense right now when people aren't making enough. They can't afford groceries. They can't afford to stay in their homes. And we're passing 65 cents a gallon gas tax. This is not the way to go, guys. So I'd love for you to speak to that. I do have some numbers and some Pew Research just came out with actual hard data about the last election. But I'd love for you to speak to that. Like, what are we missing here, guys?
Well, I think what we're witnessing is kind of the collapsing, institutional orthodoxy of the Democratic Party, who just thinks you can kind of keep doing this and has been doing it for 30 years, and we've reached a breaking point. And Senator Valadez, she has an incredible future, and she does show leadership. She texted me the other day saying, I'm committed to doing the right thing. Uh, she's one of the few legislators on either side, by the way, who really struggles with that question. Not what's the easy thing, not what's the most beneficial thing, what's the right political move. I get a lot of those texts from people all the time. I get from her, what is the right thing to do? And that is somebody who I think has the community's best interest at heart. When I mean community, I mean the community that elected her, all sides of it. She does balance that right left, spectrum in a district like hers extraordinarily well. I think she's very well constituted to do it. But she's asking the basic questions, which is, what does all of this have to do with affordability?
Yeah.
Because people are struggling, they are suffering, and that is not something that the Democratic Party right now is doing a good job of paying attention to, particularly working class people, specifically working class Latinos and people of color. They've done an abysmal job. That's just the truth. And she is feeling that void. I think she could be a person that really redefines the Republican Party in California over the trajectory of her career. And I'm increasingly impressed with what she's doing.
Yeah, yeah, as you know, I'm a big fan. Unabashed supporter of hers. Some of the numbers that came out recently, I don't know if this isn't the Pew poll, but I saw, and I know Unidos, is that how you say it?
Unidos US, yeah.
Yeah. So they're from, I think you're counting, they're more of a left leaning, but they got
Yeah.
some of these numbers that are still, screaming out to us to adjust accordingly. So, for example, cost of living inflation cited as a main concern by 52% of Latino voters. Jobs and the economy at 40%, housing affordability at 28%, 85% of Latino. So add those all up, and that's we cost of living, inflation, jobs and the economy, housing affordability. Any one of those three is a top concern. 85% of Latino voters consider the economy very important to their vote. And then actually, this is interesting. 32% of Latino respondents identified healthcare as their top concern. It's interesting because that's way up from less than 20 years ago, which it was less than 10%, less than 20 years ago. So
Let's remember there's a cost to that. It's a significant part of your monthly cost, paying that premium. So look, I would argue that even that is simply it's an affordability issue.
affordability.
So,
Yeah.
so that's why, my entire career, but most specifically when I wrote the book that we've talked about, and you and I got to know each other, when I'm talking about Latinos being economic pocketbook voters, even a left-leaning poll like that is saying it's screaming 85%, and then throwing healthcare and it's basically 100% are
Right.
basically saying this is the issue. It's not immigration, it's not deportations. Doesn't mean those issues aren't important, but my God, this is out of control. Like rent and mortgages are out of control. Home ownership is getting out of control in California. Rent is out of control in California. Groceries are expensive. We just slapped another 65 cents a gallon on top of what we're already paying the nation's highest rates. As Senator Valadez said very astutely, not right now, if ever. Let's
Yeah.
have that debate, but certainly not right now. People are screaming out, they're revolting, and we're still doubling down on putting an economic boot on people's necks. It's just that look, maybe for a lot of listeners to this podcast, hopefully a little bit more affluent, aren't as price sensitive to this. 65 cents a gallon affects pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
Unless you're driving an electric vehicle, you can afford an electric vehicle. But for working people, that is it's a death knell. It's brutal.
Yeah. So that's ultimately, when I think about the Democratic Party, it is a pretty big tent. Not just if you looked at the DNC last August and you saw everyone from Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger to AOC having that stage, but you saw, I know two figures that you've written about quite a lot. Ruben Gallego, who I mentioned, He won with a very different kind of a campaign. Now, maybe not cynically, but I thought that maybe that had a lot more to do with his opponent. Kerry Lake is just fucking nuts, you know?
Yeah.
But perhaps not. But then Ruben Gallego is a very, very different politician than Zoran Mamdani. But they have certain things in common that they're getting. And you pointed it out in a recent post on the Great Transformation. Could you talk about that a little bit? They're very far apart if you look at them
Very.
ideologically, but what do
Yeah.
they have in common?
So yeah, I wrote this piece because there has been so much teeth gnashing and hand wringing in the Democratic Party about what it means to be economic populist. If you ask the average Democrat, especially the activists, they genuinely believe they're the party of the working class. And I'm not saying that they're not as a Republican or anything else. I'm saying they're not because working class voters don't believe that anymore.
Mm,
And if working class voters don't believe you're a working class party, you're not a working class party. It's just that simple.
yeah.
So the question then becomes, the existential question becomes, do we run a centrist roadmap like Ruben Gallego, or do we go with a democratic socialist like Zoran Mamdani? And the story coming out of both of those campaigns was that both of them won back Latinos generally, but all working class people of color, the same groups that Trump picked up. Remember, Mamdani wins this primary just last Tuesday um, in the same precincts that Trump did historically well.
Yeah.
And if you go back 4 years, Eric Adams, a centrist Black Democratic police officer, does historically well with them as well. So something is happening. And my argument was, yes, it helps when you run against a Kerry Lake who is absolutely crazy and an Andrew Cuomo who's absolutely corrupt. Very, very good candidates to run against because they're very unpopular. But Ruben Gallego was running against the orthodoxy of his own party and taking a lot of progressive flack for it. He was saying we have to tighten up the border. We have to get back to building houses and building again, despite what this environmental extremism says to us. And yeah, gas is too high. Prices are too high. Mamdani says something very different. He says we need to have like city-owned grocery stores. We need to have free buses. We need to have rent control, freeze rents. Very progressive, very left-wing. Both of them attract these voters. And my argument is, as it has been for the better part of a decade, the Democratic Party has been so inept in communicating to working class voters over the past decade that it doesn't matter whether it's center or left, as long as somebody is saying it
Mm,
against the establishment and against the orthodoxy of their party. That's what economic populism is. Populism, by the way, is not right or left. There's this misnomer that there's left-wing populism and right-wing populism. That's nonsense. That's a complete misunderstanding of what populism is. But economic populism and political populism is whatever you say that is essentially upending the orthodoxy of what your party is saying. It's anti-establishment. It's anti-leadership in your own party. That's why Donald Trump did so well with Latinos. That's why Bernie Sanders did so well with Latinos. It's not that they have an ideological connection. Gallegos and some, and Mamdani could not be more different in the Democratic Party. But what they both have in common is they are upending the
oh,
leadership in both of their parties and attacking their own party by saying you don't get it and they're right, regardless of the policy prescription. That's how deep anti-establishment sentiment runs in the working class in the Democratic Party at this moment.
so they're both looking from the bottom up as
Yeah,
opposed from the top down, and their campaigns are a critique and a pushback against the establishment, but also there are certain aspects of what they're running on was also resonating. You keep on saying it's the economy, stupid. And
yeah.
so it's some of that as well. So
Well,
what?
and look, I think that's one of the reasons why Kamala Harris did so poorly is she had to defend a really bad economy. She had to defend borders that were out of control. They were. They
Yeah,
just were. Like if you're still having that debate with yourself, get into the current year. The economy was not good for working class people. It's still not. We can argue about how much to blame Biden or not, but the buck stops, on the Resolute's desk. It's your fault. The borders were out of control as a direct correlation to the policies that Biden and Harris were implementing. That's just a fact.
yeah.
You can argue with it however you want to rationalize whatever feelings you need to have. That's just the truth that the Democrats need to hear. And until they correct those, and they largely have or have been corrected for them, at least the border piece has, the economy, Trump has given them a gift. He put them right back in the game. Trump's numbers on the economy are terrible right now. But the Democrats have to come up with a solution that is anti-establishment, that acknowledges their own failures. Sorry about the long diatribe here, but let me give you a perfect case in point. Just last night, the Democrats in Sacramento voted to overhaul the California Environmental Quality Act for the first time in 50 years in a meaningful way. That's because Ezra Klein, one of their own liberal progressive voices in New York City, finally said, hey, this isn't working. Not because black and brown voices have been saying it for 20 years. They weren't listening to those voices. They weren't listening to the working class saying it. They're listening to one of their own leaders telling them, hey, California, this doesn't work. You need to get rid of CEQA. You need to change this. So guess what? They do. They do. And God, I will commend them. It doesn't go far enough, but at least they're getting the message.
Yeah.
But part of it is they have to acknowledge they have failed on a wide swath of policy problems, a wide swath. And until they do, no one's going to believe them again and shouldn't.
Yeah, the one of the central themes of what you've been talking about is, and this is how you put it. I forget where I wrote it in quotes, but I forget where I took it from. So forgive me. The way that you said it was the future of American democracy hinges on embracing its multi-ethnic reality and genuinely addressing the aspirations of a diverse working class. And
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways we're missing it. Um,
I
are
think
you
we're nibbling on the edges of it, but both parties are missing it, by the way.
both
The,
parties? Well, yeah, your visit to CPAC Latino.
yeah, I mean they don't get it. They just don't get it, and they don't want to get it. And now the Democrats, I think, the Democrats have been missing it for a decade, but at least now, with I think the problem so stark and realizing that voters that they genuinely took for granted, working class voters and people of color, ditching them, made them sit up and realize, okay, wait a second, we've got to do something different. And that created that haze that Democrats have been in for the past 4 or 5 months that only snapped out of it when Los Angeles' unrest started.
Yeah.
And Gavin Newsom finally says, forget it. We're just going to fight. We got nothing else. There's no rationalizing with this guy. All we can do is fight. So let's fight.
Am I being silly to have not quite in the back of my mind, but coming toward at least the middle of my mind, the possibility that 2026 and 2028 won't be fairly decided?
Well, I think we can't ever discount that possibility anymore. I think 2026 will be fine because it's handled by the states. And for better or for worse, most of the elections that are battleground House seats are going to be held in blue states,
Right.
which just means there's going to be less shenanigans from the Republican Party. Now, right-wing partisans will hear what I'm saying and saying, well, what about the blue states? They're letting illegals vote. There's been no evidence offered by anybody, none. And as somebody who's done this for a living on both sides, I can tell you that is just complete horseshit. Sorry, I know it's a family show. That's just complete
I've been
nonsense.
waiting for you. You let me do all the cursing on this
Yeah.
episode, so thank you.
Yeah. So anybody want to push back to me? Give me some real evidence. Don't give me Dinesh D'Souza or your crazy right wing, one nation, whatever nonsense. Show me actual hard data as a political professional who does this for a living that there's been elections stolen by Democrats relative. Here's where the hypocrisy is really exposed. The Republicans will tell you on one hand that they're winning the Latino vote by bigger margins than everybody is saying, but also that it's illegal immigrants coming here to give the votes to the Democrats.
Right.
It's like which is it, right?
Right.
It's the same thing as saying, oh, all these illegals come here to get onto welfare system and steal our benefits, but they're also the ones taking all of our jobs. Like which is it? Which is
Yeah.
it? Or maybe it's just you buying your own bullshit after a while because you just don't like Mexicans. You don't like people that aren't white. Maybe that's just what it is.
Yeah. I think I'm not going to call them friends, but there, in some instances, people that I know, people that I've been in conversation with, I think they're addicted to hating someone.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hate is addictive.
yeah.
Anger is addictive.
Yeah.
Fear and anxiety, they are addictive. That's why the algorithms on these news shows and these social media platforms do what they do. You literally get addicted to it. That's
Yeah.
why Fox News, if you watch Fox News, if you don't watch it, give yourself an experiment. Watch it for 15 minutes. It's like the Chiron is angry about who to hate. Hannity's, veins in his necks are pissed off at trans or Antifa or illegals or Muslims or whoever. Like, who are we mad at? Who are we gonna, get rid of? Let's turn the alligators on them, right? And it's just like, just hate rage. And that's addicting. When you watch that, and so many people have this on the background of their lives for hours and hours and hours, once you don't have that being injected into your veins, you need that hate fix because that's what keeps you glued to those platforms.
So it's interesting. I had a conversation. I forget if it was Pastor Doug Paget or no, it might have been Andrew Heaton. Oh man, I'm gonna have to go back and check this because whoever it is gonna be annoyed that I didn't remember it was them. It was an epiphany that we've talked about that since for at least the last 4 years. Denver Riggleman came on and he talked about the literal. There's a chemical reaction that we have in our brains as a response to stimuli of anger and fear, and
Yeah.
it's the same response, chemical response, as if getting a hit of crack cocaine.
Yeah.
Well, someone recently came on and said when we listen to someone, when we see someone's humanity, when we hear and take in someone's story and they feel heard and they feel understood, there's also a chemical reaction.
Mm.
And it's the love chemical, for lack of a better word. It's basically a love chemical. So not that I'm trying to I don't want to be cliche, but I think that's a good place to start. Sometimes I sit with somebody who's clearly on the Trump train, has been since the get-go, and it's just getting angrier and angrier. And my job is then just to listen, just to allow for this person because maybe they don't invite him to Thanksgiving anymore. Maybe he just hasn't had anybody actually give him 10 minutes to get some stuff that he's frustrated or worried about off of his chest. So I have the TP&R question for you, but I want to ask it in a different way. This and here's and bear with me as I tease this out a little bit. How do you think we can do better at having conversations with specifically Latino friends and family, or with friends and family about Latino voters across our differences? Meaning, some of my liberal friends and progressive friends are still stuck in an identitarian mindset,
Yeah.
and can do the things that piss people off. That I call it moral chauvinism in a way.
Yeah.
Some of my Trump supporting friends talk as if all immigrants are, like you said, rapists or gangbangers or murderers, like Trump talked about in his very first speech at the Golden Escalator. So a lot of these conversations just aren't going well. But how can we do better at it? How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
I mean, it is possible. I think that there's a question as to whether or not it's productive, candidly, which is why I love you and love doing your show and love your commitments to your fellow humans. It's something I need to get better at, I think, candidly. But what I will say is this: the best way to talk about, I think, politics and religion is to not talk about it through the lens of politics and religion.
Mm,
Meet people kind of where they're at and understand their day to day. Just listen, right? Most people are not consumed with politics and religion. Those of us that are see the world through that lens, but we're a very small segment of the population. The people that I think that are just trying to make it work day to day, trying to get their kids off to soccer practice or afford getting them into the league in the first place, or worried about losing a job, they're not thinking, they're not watching the bill working its way through Washington, D.C. right now. They're not, they might get a little bit of the smattering of the stuff on social media if it really goes viral, but by and large, they're watching baseball standings. They're looking at the scores. They're looking to get away from this, not to lean into it. And when you understand that, that's how you start to connect with them culturally. And when you connect with their culture, and I don't just mean their food, their dance, their religion. I just mean blue collar culture, working class culture. There is such a thing. It's a very necessary thing, especially in American style democracy. When you understand people's reality and where they're at, not just their struggles, but their hopes and their ambitions and their wishes, their desires, their what they want for their children, what they are thinking about every day. In fact, ask them this. what are the top three things that you think about? And I think that would be very enlightening. You ask somebody like me, and I'll be like, "Oh, the end of the Constitution and the violation of rights and federal overreach and blah blah blah." I'm one of a very small percent of Americans who are consumed by that question.
Yeah.
Most people are going to say, my daughter's really struggling in the third grade, and I can't figure out exactly what it is. I don't know if it's the teacher or if there's a bigger issue or what that means, but I'm worried about how I get her help if there is a problem. Like that's the concern, right? And ask what's beyond that. Well, we've got this situation. My husband's work is kind of a little bit squishy right now. And this is kind of what's going on. So this is what that means. And yeah, price of food has gone out of control. We're not able to go out to a restaurant every Friday like we used to. Like that's how you start to connect is not listening through the lens of politics and religion, but understand that all of those other issues frame the way they see politics and frame the way they understand their religion.
That's a really great point. Is what are you concerned about on a day-to-day basis? I was just thinking of Joe Walsh has come on your show and vice versa. I know here over the last year or so, and I always think about him and Fred Guttenberg's relationship. They were brought on to shows. I've talked about this a lot. They were brought on to shows to basically fight about gun legislation. Joe being as a self-described rabid gun rights activist, and Fred having lost his daughter Jamie in the Parkland shooting. But it was in the green room where Joe heard about Jamie, where Joe, learned about Fred's daughter. It wasn't all of a sudden, it wasn't about legislation or where they disagreed. It was then about two dads connecting, right?
Yeah.
And shared priorities, shared values. So they still disagree on a lot of policy.
Yeah.
But they have this human connection that I think transcends what
And,
those policy differences might be.
and that connection is what we're losing. That's really what we're losing when we lose community in the real world. We don't get those connections online. We don't get those connections on the digital platforms that we are increasingly spending our lives on. You get those when you're in person in a green room and you can see a man's brokenness because he
Yeah,
lost a child.
yeah.
You can feel it. And there's something very human that we're losing. And as we lose that part of our humanity, it becomes very, very difficult to find that connectedness that says, we might disagree, but we're still fathers.
Yeah.
And even if we disagree, I'm still going to support you as a father and as an American and as a human being that's trying to do the right thing, even though I really, really don't think you're doing the right thing.
Um, do you have any questions for me?
I'm going to ask you the question I regularly ask you first, then I'll have a couple, which is one, are you glad you started the podcast still after all of this time? And two, what would you do different knowing what you know now years into it and becoming quite a success?
Oh, thanks, man. So yeah, I'm glad every day, even on my worst, even on my worst interviews. I've only had two off the top of my head where I was like, oh man, that didn't go well. And one of which I thought went well, but then I got a text from you where you're like, what the fuck was that? I'm not going to mention her name, but I had somebody on that was totally full of shit. And you called me out on it, which I'm really appreciative of. But there was another one that also didn't go well. It was entertaining, an entertaining enough conversation, but in the aftermath, I was so disillusioned about this person and what his contributions were. But dude, I'm like 300 or so episodes in,
Wow.
and we're talking about two interviews, right? But
Yeah.
even if you asked me the day after those interviews, I'd still say, yeah, I'm absolutely glad I did it. Um, and it's something. It's a calling. It's a second mountain calling, as David Brooks would refer to it. Um, so it gives me a sense of um, mission. But here's the thing: it's mission and proper perspective, where I know that I'm not doing anything huge. I'm not Martin Luther King. Like I'm not even in that league. But I feel like um, I'm in the right orchestra, if that makes any sense. I'm playing an instrument in the right orchestra with to a composition that's just we're playing a brilliant composition together. So yeah,
Do you feel that? Do you feel that every day?
yeah, every day I get to either read up on somebody, study, prepare, do post production, even the mundane work. Like for me, the post I'm not great at the post production, but but it's something I enjoy doing. The way that I used to love cleaning the toilets in the theaters where I was producing theater in New York back in the day. I got to have some plays that I wrote produced. I was on stage here and there. But if we were doing a new translation of one of the Chekhov plays for even an audience of 50 people in Chelsea, I was perfectly happy cleaning those toilets. you know
Yeah,
so
good for you. Well, you just like you understand the role of. I think Dr. King might push back too and saying, he's only possible because of all the voices in the chorus making his louder, right? That's the whole
mm,
point.
yeah, yeah,
I want to ask
but
you another question, totally
sure.
unrelated. Ukraine. I know your people are from Ukraine.
Yeah.
Where do you think things stand? Where's this going?
It really boggles my mind that right now we have a lot of voices, both in the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, as well as a lot of Democrats who look at what the Trump administration did in Iran about a week ago. And rightfully so, I think are pretty supportive. We know that this was a regime that caused a lot of pain and murder, and they were a nuclear threat to my family who's in Israel. And what boggles my mind is that we're not drawing the parallel with supporting an American democratic ally that was wrongfully invaded by a neighboring nuclear threat. I don't understand where there's a disconnect there, right? So, not to mention the fact that we didn't put American boots on the ground. We were supporting our ally for these last 3+ years. So, sorry, I forget what your specific question was, but
I mean,
uh,
this is helpful, but let me ask you along those lines. Let me pull that thread a little bit. Um, Ukraine seems to me to be the one issue where Republicans have not completely lost their minds and are still consistent to largely where they were in the 1980s. The average base Republican voter still supports Ukraine. Our political leadership, our political leadership, on the Republican side, that's where the problem is. And
mhm.
that's why, like I was saying, you don't see the disconnect. I mean, I see it pretty clearly, right? Like you got Tucker Carlson and JD Vance and this cast of characters, Marjorie Taylor Greene doing Russia's bidding is essentially what this is, right? But it's the one issue where Republicans still remain pretty anti-Russia. Like they'll vote for tariffs and tax increases. They'll support this guy on getting rid of free trade. They'll vote for this guy on anything. This horrible budget bill that he's about to pass, it's going to get rid of their own Medicaid. They'll die of a vaccine before they turn on him, but they're still pretty anti-Russia.
is
And
that
what do you
is that because we've been acculturated that way for 80 years?
I mean, I
So,
would think so, but but that doesn't explain like Republicans on taxes. That used to be the only thing that meant you were Republican.
mm,
Like
I
you could be anything. You could be pro-choice, you could be pro-gay marriage as a Republican, but you couldn't be for tax increases. Donald Trump ran on the largest tax increase in American history, and Republicans were like, "Yeah, give us more tariffs. Let's go. Let's have at it. Let's do it."
Right, right. Yeah, I don't. This is a confusing area to me because I have conversations with people that maybe they're tuning into the certain podcasts, Tucker Carlson's podcast, because I do get pushback from friends that are Trump supporting friends that are basically anti-Ukraine, and they're justifying it accordingly, leading up to the election, even to this day, and it doesn't make any sense to me. Why
Mhm.
wouldn't we support a democratic ally that's been wrongfully invaded by a nuclear neighboring threat? It does, especially when we're not risking American soldiers
Soldiers, yeah.
in direct harm's way. So I don't understand, but I'm encouraged to hear that your experience of, you know, how would you call it? Just everyday Republicans voting Republicans, maybe isn't reflective of some of the voices that I'm hearing that are listening to a Tucker or others. I
Usually their message is Ukraine is corrupt. right? Or we're wasting taxpayer dollars, but they'll throw money, into the Middle East times 10 with the same money, and to somehow suggest that Russia is less corrupt than Ukraine, like I don't understand it. It's just
Yeah.
there's no logic to it. It's just pure Russian talking points is usually what people come back with, but that's what they're getting from Tucker Carlson. It's just
Yeah.
pure straight Russian propaganda.
Yeah, no, I believe it or not, one of my kids explained it to me why he didn't tell me how he was voting, but he basically told me how he was voting. He said, well, when it comes to all of these wars overseas before the election, all these wars overseas, I see it this way. I said, like, hey, I want to help out a friend, but if I need to take care of myself, I got to take care of myself first. So it's basically, a 21-year-old's version of what JD Vance has theologized now, right? So I understood what he was trying to say, but I didn't necessarily agree with it. No, no, man. Like when you grow up, sometimes you're gonna, put yourself in harm's way for those you love and those you care about. So
How does he feel about the race now, the elections,
we
the
haven't
country?
talked about it actually. So I don't know if I ever told you the story, but so he was the one that at first wasn't anti-vaccine. He was just vaccine skeptical. And the way he described it to me is, I don't want to be an experiment. I don't want to be part of you know, the test group to see if these things work or not. Let me see if it gets a FDA approval, and I'll make my decision from there. But because he said that, everybody else around him were like, "What are you crazy?" Just dogpiling the rabbit. We just beat the crap out of him, rhetorically speaking, and because we didn't give him the oxygen to think it through on his own, and he got he got attacked for it. It made him dig his heels in that much more. So by the time it did get FDA approved, he was like, forget it. No, there's no damn way I'm ever doing that crap. We
I
basically made
I
him into an
I
anti-vaxxer.
I don't believe that.
Why do you say that?
Because that anybody who is expressing that sort of vaccine skepticism is an anti-vaxxer. They're just afraid to say it because they know that they're not social, it's not socially acceptable. You didn't make him anything.
Okay.
Whatever he was consuming made him that. Basic research of credible vaccines are the greatest technology we've invented as human beings in the last century. Like the data is overwhelming. It's not even close. So don't put that on yourself or your family.
Okay.
That is not true. He
Yeah.
did
So
not do anything.
to be fair, you nailed him. One of his favorite contemporary pundits is Charlie Kirk. So
Yeah, it's just nonsense. They rationalize it by saying, "Oh, I'm not saying that I'm anti-vax. I'm just, I don't want to be the first one. Once the FDA approves it, the FDA approves it. Well, I'm still not sure. Just say what you just, if you're not, if you're going to deny science, just say you believe the Earth is flat.
man,
Just
I
say it.
would love to hang out with you when you're hanging out with one of your kids, especially one of the kids that like pushes your buttons. Because our kids are
Probably wouldn't want to see that, but yeah,
they're all around the same age. Like I have a 24,
yeah,
22, and 20 year old. So
yeah,
they're
same age spread. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So I'd love to maybe just take some notes, if nothing else, or
I'll
maybe
do
we
that
can
next time.
commiserate at the very least.
Right.
So, Mike, before we go, how can we get the paperback version of Latino Century? Read
Yeah.
and watch you on Substack and listen to the Latino Vote. Just be sure to follow all the great work that you're doing.
Thanks again for having me, Chorus. Great spending some time with you. Yeah, the Latino Century, how America's largest minority is transforming democracy, just came out in paperback. So proud to say it just a couple of weeks ago. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on anywhere you get your books. Probably buy the hardcovers used now. Um, Let me know your thoughts. I respond to everybody on every platform, but the place where I live the most, as Corey mentioned, is on Substack, The Great Transformation. I write on these topics that we've been discussing regularly, try to provide some unique analysis. Most of the focus is on kind of institutional change and transformation. It's critical, I think, of both parties, but I think it's insightful, and that's my hope. I don't believe in either party at this point anymore because I think the parties are outdated, not because of well, read the Substack, you'll understand why. But that's where I live. You can also find me on, Blue Sky or Threads or Twitter, X still. But Substack is kind of where I live for the moment. So thanks, Corey. Appreciate you
You
allowing me to
bet.
plug.
We'll be sure to put those links in the show notes. And we did cover a lot. Is there anything important we haven't discussed that you'd like to add before we call
Boy,
it?
we could do 3 or 4 more episodes, but I
We
think we
could.
got. Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks for doing this, Mike. It's always good to see you, man. And listen, if you're down next time you're down in SoCal, just give me the heads up. I'd love to finally buy you some of that sushi we were talking about, or something.
Yeah.
Or
No,
maybe I'll
let's
come
do
out to
that.
Camarillo or Moore Park or
We'll
whatever.
part.
Just yeah,
We'll make it work. We'll figure something out, man. I miss your brain. I love talking to you in person. We go for hours when we meet in person, so let's do that.
absolutely. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write that review. We definitely need written reviews, which are great. And now you can watch these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/at politics and religion. And I am on all the socials. Ron's going to be mad at me, but I'm actually back on TikTok. I am at Corey S. Nathan. I just had to okay, I give up. Let China watch me. At Corey S. Nathan, at Corey, S is a Sam, Nathan, at Corey S. Nathan, and Substack, of course. Now, go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.